So today we're going to make some no-knead bread, and we'll start by measuring the flour into the mixing bowl. I have the bowl here on a scale. It's nice to measure your flour because flour can get packed or it can be all fluffed up, and so you'll get different amounts if you try to do it with cups. But if you measure it with a scale, you'll always get the same amount. Today we're going to be making two big 16-inch loaves, and so we're going to be using 2,000 grams of flour. This is whole wheat flour that we ground ourselves, which means it has everything in it. If you buy store-bought whole wheat, they've likely taken out half of the bran and all of the germ, which means you're not getting the whole thing. All those vitamins, oil-soluble vitamins that you need. So, got 2,124. We're going to put all the dry ingredients into this bowl. Now I'm going to measure my salt and my yeast. On the scale we need just 6.4 grams of yeast because this bread is going to be rising for about 6 hours. And so we don't need very much yeast. If we put a lot in it, it would go real fast, but since we're not kneading it, we're wanting it to go slow so it can have the time to develop the gluten on its own. So we're going to get about 6 grams of yeast. And I'll press tare on the scale, which zeroes it out. And we'll put in the salt, 42 grams of salt. Okay, the salt will go in later, after the gluten has had time to soak up with the water, but we'll mix the yeast in right now. So here's the container I'm going to measure my water into. We need about 1656 grams of water. Okay, and we also need honey, and I'm going to stir that into the wet ingredients. 84 grams, so I'll tear out the scale again and measure the honey. This way I'm not having to try to get honey out of a measuring cup. It's nice just to do things in a scale, directly into the container you need. 84 grams. So no scales make cooking a whole lot easier, not just for bread making, but everything else. You don't have to wash as many containers and measuring cups or lose expensive ingredients. So I'll just stir this honey in so that it's dissolved. So I've got my honey stirred into the water, and I'm going to check the temperature of the water. I would have actually done this before I stirred the honey in. I want the dough to be warm. Around 80 degrees is best for it to rise throughout the day. If it's a really cold day, you'll want warmer water. If it's a really hot day, you'll want a little cooler water. So my water's about 83. I think that'll be good. My flour was a little bit cool, so it'll probably come out to be about 80 degrees. So that'll be good. This is a good thermometer that works real well from thermoworks.com. It's cheap and it works real well. They have expensive ones that are nicer, but this one really does it. Now we need our oil. It's the last ingredient we'll need, so I'll put this back on the scale, press tare, and just measuring 84 grams of oil. There we go. Turn off the scale and I'm done with it till it's time to make the loaves. I'm going to stir the yeast into the flour so it'll get mixed better. So in here is the whole wheat flour and the yeast. I'm using dry instant yeast. Now I'm just going to dump in the liquids and stir it up. When you try this, you'll see how much easier this is than making bread by hand, where you knead it for a long time and get carpal tunnel or anything else. This doesn't require hardly any effort. And for me, I found it coming out about as good with whole wheat flour as bread that's been mixed in a Bosch. A Bosch mixer, or some other type of electronic bread mixer, does do a little bit better. But if you don't have one or you don't have electricity, then this is a very good second best. Just good to know how to do. So I'm just going to mix this in until the flour is all soaked up, and then I'm just going to let it sit. I'm not going to do any kneading. Just going to make sure the flour hydrates. At this point, it's going to sit for 20 minutes just so that the gluten in the flour can soak up and begin to form. Then after that, I'll mix in the salt, and then after that, we will let it start rising and doing its own kneading. Okay, I think it's all mixed in, everything's wet. So we'll just let this sit for 20 minutes. I'll put on a piece of plastic over it so it won't dry out and nothing will get into it.
Okay.
So our dough has been sitting here for about 20 minutes covered in a plastic. So the flour is all soaked up by now. Now it's time to mix in the salt. I already have it measured up from before, so I will sprinkle it over top. Then I'm going to moisten my hands because that helps make the dough not stick to it so bad. And I will just begin to mix it in. The process I'm using is what's called a fold. You grab it here, you lift it up, let it stretch, and then you double it over. Right now the gluten is just starting to form, so it's not very elastic. But as you see later on, it'll really rise up a lot and get a lot more stretchy. So I'm just trying to get the salt mixed in by doing a couple folds. Again, you grab it here, let it stretch, fold it up, turn your bowl 90 degrees and grab it again. After a while your dough gets tight, like it doesn't want to do it anymore. At that point you just put it back in your bowl and cover it up with the plastic and let it sit for around half an hour until the dough has risen and all the gluten strings have loosened up and it's ready to be folded again. The folding stretches and tightens up the gluten, and then the yeast rises and makes gas and stretches out the gluten, and it kneads itself that way. So we'll let this sit covered for another half an hour. Okay, this bread has been sitting here for about half an hour, and we're going to do another fold. I'll moisten my hand so the dough won't stick to it. And this is how you do it. You lift up the dough so where it stretches, you fold it back down to where it's doubled up. Maybe the camera can come look at how, so you pick it up and it stretches into a rectangle, you lay it down to where it folds into half. You rotate the bowl 90 degrees, do it again. The dough was real soft when I started, and then after doing it a couple times, it gets tight. It kind of seizes up to where it doesn't want to stretch so much, and at that point it'll start to tear a little bit. So that's when it's done. Once the dough gets tight, you stop doing the folds, just cover it back up, and let it sit for another half an hour to an hour, and it'll rise and stretch that gluten with the gas bubbles that are expanding, and then it'll be all soft and ready for you to tighten it up again with some more folds. So we'll let it sit here for another half an hour, 45 minutes, just whenever you get back to it. Okay, we're back again to do another fold. You can see that the bread has risen a lot. The gluten is really developing and there's a lot of gas formation. So I've kind of loosened it from the bowl, or else when I pick it up the bowl will stick to it. Doing another fold, lift it up, let it stretch under its own weight and fold it up again. Do a couple more of these till the dough gets tight. Maybe one more here. You stop when the dough starts tearing and it just doesn't want to fold very much. I think that's good enough, and I'll put the plastic back on and let it sit for another hour, 45 minutes or so. Just however long till it's risen up and gotten soft and the air bubbles have stretched out the gluten and everything. So just whenever you get back to it, do another one. I usually do maybe 6 to 10, just depending on how my day is going and everything. Folds like this before we put it into a tall skinny container to do the bulk fermentation before we make the loaves. So we've been doing a number of folds on this dough for the last about 6 hours, and now it's ready for the bulk ferment stage. Bulk fermenting is where you roll it up into a ball and put it into a tall narrow container like this Cambro 8-quart restaurant container used in restaurant supply and stuff like that. You can an 8-quart container will comfortably rise about 2,000 grams of dough. Because you have to have room for it to rise. It can more than double sometimes. So because I have 4,000 grams of dough, I'm going to divide this dough in half and raise it in 2 containers. So I've put oil out on my countertop, and I'll just dump out the dough. I have a scale right here with a greased plate on it that I will use to make sure that I divided my dough in half. Let's see, that's about 2,091. Yeah, this needs a little bit more. Okay, it's about divided in half. So now I'm going to form the dough into a ball by kind of flattening out my ball and bringing it in from the outside. Go around the outside of your dough and keep on bringing it into the center. This forms a tight ball and helps get the gluten in order and makes it tight so that when the gas from the yeast makes bubbles, it will press against the gluten and make it expand. So now that I brought it all into the center, this area here, kind of like a belly button, I'm going to roll between the table and my hand like this to seal it off. So it's kind of like a balloon with a twisted off bottom here and a smooth top. And I'll put that, the twisted side down with the smooth side up, right into my container like this. And cover it with plastic and let it rise. I'll do this again so you can see it. Need a little more olive oil so it doesn't stick. So I'm bringing it from the outside towards the center. Then I'm going to roll it to seal off that twisted area. And then, because I don't have another tall skinny container with me right now, this ball I'm going to rise in this bowl. You notice how it's about as tall as it is wide. It's not ideal, but it will work because I've done it before. So I'll put that in the middle, cover both of them with plastic, and let them rise till they're fully risen. We'll come back when they're about half done. I'll poke the top and let you see that they're still rising up. They're not ready, they're not fully risen yet. Then we'll come back again later when they're fully risen, and I'll poke the top and you'll see it start to fall a little bit, and you'll know that it's fully risen. You can see that it's raised, but when it's fully raised, the bubbles are long and skinny, like about 1 inch long if you look here on the side of this clear container. But what's really definitive is if you come and, you want to come up close to where you can see, if you wet your finger and then poke the top, you'll notice that it springs back. It's still rising, and it's still on its way up. So this bread is not done rising yet. We'll wait till it's risen more, and when we poke the top, it begins to fall just a little bit. Okay, this bread has been bulk fermenting, here for a while, and it looks like it's about risen. What I'm going to do is moisten my finger, and then you can come up here and look here in the top. You'll see I'll poke it, and it comes back a little bit, so it still could go a little bit farther. Poke it again. I don't see it quite falling yet, so I think it needs just a little bit more time. When it's all the way done, when you poke it, the whole thing starts to go down a little bit. Wetted my finger, and I'm going to poke the top, and it's pretty ready. It's ready. It's ready. It's starting to fall a little bit. So I have my table. I'm going to grease my tabletop a little bit more. My hands. And I'll dump out this first one. Set this off to the side here. Move this out of your way so you can see better. I am going to, with this bread made out of hard red wheat that has good gluten, in these long pans. These are 16-inch Pullman pans. They're different than regular bread pans in that they have straight walls. That helps with bread with poor gluten. With this no-knead method, I make bread out of other things that has really bad gluten, like spelt or durum or emmer or other things that have real bad gluten. And so that's important with these to use pans with straight walls because they support the gluten better. I have long pans, so I'm going to put 2 small loaves in here because this bread with good gluten comes out better if I have 2 small ones. So I'm going to divide this into 2,000 gram loaves. I'll weigh it here on the scale and just make sure I got it divided equally, which I do. It from the outside and bring it in like this, and then just roll that till it's all sealed off, kind of like twist it off like a balloon or like a belly button, and set it off to the side. We'll do the next one. Taking it from the outside, bringing it in till it's kind of tightened up and rounded, and then rolling it, dragging it between the table and the side of my hand like this, trying to twist it off like a balloon. Okay. After you've formed your dough, you cover it with plastic so it doesn't dry out. We'll do this other one. Again, we'll weigh it, make sure we've got it divided equally. Yep, perfect. That means the other one is too. I need a little bit more oil. So I'm taking it from the outside, bringing it to the inside, and then rolling it to seal it off. This way it has a nice, good, kind of like a skin of gluten over top of it, and all the gluten fibers are lined up good for making a loaf, and the bubbles from the yeast rising will be able to press against it and raise up our loaf nicely. This is the last loaf. Get it all rounded up like this. Now that we have the loaves rounded up into balls, we're going to cover them with plastic and let them sit for about 20 minutes for the gluten to relax and just raise a little bit, and then we'll form them into loaves and put them into the pans. Okay, it's been about 20 minutes, so I'm going to moisten my finger again, and if you touch here on the edge, you'll see that it makes a pretty good indent, but it still comes out. It still pops back out after you poke the dough. That's a good sign. That means the gluten isn't overextended. You don't want to get to where you poke it and it doesn't come back at all. That's letting it go too far. So 20 minutes is plenty, so we'll go ahead and start forming the bread. Don't need this anymore. Just a little oil for my hands for the table so it doesn't stick. And I guess I should oil the pans first. Pullman pans like these with the straight edges that are good for things with poor gluten Come in a variety of sizes. These are the largest 16-inch pans. They also come in I think it's 9 and 13-inch, which are the 9-inch is closer to the size of a regular bread pan. But I like these big ones because you can get more dough in one shot, one handling of the dough and pan and everything. So if your oven will hold a 16-inch pan, then it works good for me. But like I said, because this is better gluten, I like to make 2 individual loaves in these big pans. So I'm going to form this bread the way I do when I form good bread made in like a mixer. I flatten out the thing. First of all, I turn the ball upside down, flatten it out to about that thick. Then I fold it up about that far, flatten it out, I pick it up and stretch it. You're trying to get the gluten tight. Go like this, bring in the other side. You want to get out the big air bubbles, because if you have big air bubbles and you don't pop them out, squeeze them out of the dough, they'll turn into holes in your bread. Now I'm just going to twist it up, trying to get a tight skin of gluten stretchy over the top of the loaf, so it can the expanding gas can pressurize under it and make the loaf rise. I sealed off the edge like this. I'll do more so you'll see. So again, take the loaf that you have turned into a ball, turn it upside down on a greased tabletop, get it out to about 1.5 inches thick, bring up the bottom so it's kind of like a half circle, pick it up while you're stretching it, set it back down on the table, bring one side in, smash it down, another side, seal it, and then I just tuck it under with my thumbs while I roll it under, just trying to get a nice tight skin of the gluten over top. I'm sealing the edge right here with right here against the table, sealing down the edge, and these two will rise up nicely, and then I can after they're baked I can just pull them apart and I'll have 2 loaves that'll fit in a regular bread bag. Again, that's just because I have such long pans. Another one. When you pick it up and then set it back down like I did, like this, it stretches out the gluten. You want the gluten tight so the bubbles can, when the expanding gas of the yeast can press against it and make your bread rise. Sealing it off with right here on my hand and the edge. Okay, one more to go. Pick it up, turn it the smooth side down, flatten it out. I kind of lift it up to let its weight stretch it out, and then press it out. Seal it off again with my hand and the edges with the side of my hand. Put it in the pan. Now I'm going to cover it with plastic and let it rise till it's risen. I don't want it, if I don't want to over rise it, if I let it go all the way the gluten can go, then it'll be too far, and it may, when I put it in the oven and it gets hot, it may fall, cave in on itself. I want to get it while it's still, when I poke it, moisten my finger and poke it, it still reacts some, but it's not really springy. Like right now, if I were to moisten my finger and poke this, it would be really, it'd be like a real tight balloon that you can hardly poke it. But once it expands and the gluten relaxes and everything, and I poke it, it'll still be indented a little bit, but it'll come back some, and that'll be about the right time. For this 2,000 grams of hard red wheat dough in here, it'll probably be about when it comes to the top. So as you can see, you want to look again, it'll probably about double by looking at it. See, it's about halfway, and it'll fill in and get about to the top, and that's when I'll put it in. You can figure it out by trial and error. Some people like their bread more dense, which means they would bake it sooner. rather than letting it rise as much. Some people like theirs more fluffy, so they'd let it go a little bit longer before they bake it. So you'll just have to see what you like best. Our bread's been rising, so I moistened my finger and I'm going to see how stretchy the gluten still is, poking it, and it still comes back some, but it stays indented a little. I think it's ready enough to bake it. It could go farther, but it's good enough now, and it's getting late, so I'm ready to put it in. You don't. So. I'm baking it at 350. This is a wood cook stove, so we'll see how it does. Okay, the bread's been in the oven for about 50 minutes. This is a wood cook stove oven, so it's more unpredictable than a regular one, electric. So I think maybe it was a little hot, so it got done that quick. What we're going to do now is pull them out and check them and see if they're done. They look like they're done to me. So how you tell if bread is done is if the internal temperature at the center of the loaf is 200 degrees. I had the same nice thermometer from ThermalWorks that I used earlier to test the dough temperature, and I'll just stick it in here into the center and see what it reads. 200.3. So we're good to go. I'll pull the other loaf out, and you want your bread thoroughly baked so that all the yeast is killed and it'll be nice and healthy. Okay, so I'm going to take them out of the pans and let them cool on these racks till they're cool. Once they're cool, we'll slice them open and let you see what they look like. So we baked this bread and now it's all cooled off. You want to wait till it cools before you put it into bags. You'll notice that it's in 2 loaves because that's how I did it. You can do it in just one. So I'll just separate one here. Then we'll cut a few slices and see what it looks like. 100% whole wheat bread, no white flour, no strenuous kneading. And I'd say it looks pretty good. Holds together. You could make a sandwich out of it easily, and it's not all crumbly, moist. Looks pretty good.